you all for attending, and I'd like to especially thank our speaker, Dr. David Guerena, who will be speaking to us today about Learn by Doing, an unexpected journey, and he'll be telling us about some of the different projects that he's been working on during his career. He has come to CIMMYT headquarters recently based in Mexico and is working here as a soil scientist and system agronomist, but has worked at other CIMMYT sites in the future and also for other projects such as the Acre Fund in Africa, which some of you may be familiar with. So without further ado, I'd like to ask our speaker to please start, and I'd like to thank him again for giving this presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining and thank you for participating. Would it be possible, Kate, if we can do a quick run of introductions? I think it'd be great for me to know who's on the line and what they do and where they are, perhaps.
Sure, that sounds great. So maybe we'll just go down the list of participants as I can see them here in the side menu. So Anna, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon for everybody. I'm Ana Oliveira from IITA. I'm a molecular geneticist. Thank you.
Gideon?
Hi, this is Gideon from CIMMYT.
Kiyoshi, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Kiyoshi from Chubu University, Japan. Recently, we organized a Gobi workshop with Star and Yo in University of Tokyo. That's why I know this. Thank you.
Thank you. And the participant listed as La Libertad.
Hello, everyone. I am from Colombia. I listen in the morning. Bye.
Thank you. And then Miguel. Okay, I'm not. Miguel, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Okay, so hello again. So my background is not in breeding. My background is in soil science and agronomy. Kate and I have just started collaborating since I've came to Mexico. And a lot of it has to do with sort of data systems, ICT, and kind of advanced analytics. And it was an interesting sort of collaboration and conversations between Kate and also Tom Payne and Rosemary Shrestha about how we can sort of cross-pollinate between data systems work on the breeding side and the bioinformatics side, and also on what we do on the landscape scale and farm scale within agronomy. So I imagine this is probably a bit of a different type of topics from you all, but from Kate, and I'm really excited to be able to connect with you all. So then I'll get going here, and please chime in if you want me, if I'm not to what I've said. It'd be nice if this was a conversation, more or less. Gideon, I apologize. You've probably seen most of this before, but I just shrunk in it and added a couple of things here to adapt it to the Gobi audience. Okay.
No, that's fine. I'm just listening in just to be to know what you're telling other people as well.
All right. So my early experiences with influences came from some of these childhood movies that I was into. So Indiana Jones and Back to the Future. And I think Indiana Jones because the work that we do in international agriculture is really quite adventurous and really quite interesting, experiencing different cultures, different communities. And it's really, I think, one of the really exciting things that I've done in my career, and that I think we all do as a community. And then Back to the Future, I think, is interesting because it provides us sort of an opportunity to understand what is possible with pushing the realms of science. I know Back to the Future was kind of more of a whimsical Hollywood film, but thinking about the advancements that have happened over the past 10 years or so in data systems, data science, analytics, CRISPR for the genetic folks is really, quite interesting, and thinking how we can, think beyond sort of what we're doing now into what's possible 10 years from now is also, I think, quite interesting, and a really important driver of the work that I'm doing. And then sort of rock and roll is kind of keeping independence and keeping sort of like a let's give anything a try sort of mentality. So kind of no holds barred to what we can think about from a science perspective. And so these were some of my earlier influences. I was originally born in Santa Barbara, California, and lived the first maybe 20 years of my life in California. And then the first bit of my journey on my academic path took me east to Cornell University. And I think that many people on the line may be at Cornell. If you're part of Cornell, I was there from 2008 till about 2014, and I spent most of my time in Bradfield Hall. So I think I'm familiar with many of the folks in the breeding programs at Cornell. Got a couple of degrees in soil science along the way, and one of my most, I think, proudest achievements is here, this signature, and I'll blow it up. If you can't understand the writing, my endorsement for my early academic career comes from Arnold Schwarzenegger, the man who then played Conan the Barbarian. So if anyone's questioning my authority and my topics, I'll have to defer to Arnold Schwarzenegger for my defense. But after graduate school, then I kept going east. So I went from Cornell to in Ithaca, New York, to Kenya, and I started, as Kate said, I started working with an organization called 1 Acre Fund, which was a very interesting organization. If you're familiar with it, great. If not, maybe I'll give a brief introduction. So 1 Acre Fund is a nonprofit social enterprise that focuses on improving livelihoods of farmers, mostly in Africa and mostly in Eastern and Southern Africa. They have a program that includes financing of loans for farmers, smallholder farmers, for seeds and for fertilizers. They do distribution of seeds and fertilizers to within walking distances of their farmer groups. They do agricultural training, so they run an extension program, maybe one of the largest extension programs in Africa. And then they do market facilitation. So then the yields from mostly maize farmers in Africa, they facilitate then access to markets and sort of the financial circle coming back from production all the way through sales. So principally, the countries they operate in are Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, but they've recently established programs in Zambia, Malawi, Uganda, Ethiopia, and are moving into India and have operations also in Myanmar. When I first started with 1 Acre Fund, they had about 250,000 farmers, and I think today, they're pushing close to 1 million farmers. So one of the initial aspects of the work that I was doing at 1 Acre Fund is how can you efficiently scale fertilizers and seeds and ag extension to so many farmers across many different cultures and countries, and do it in a way where you're sort of maximizing profit margins for farmers themselves, since they're paying for all the inputs. So there's complicated logistic chains, which fertilizers to use, which information to put into agricultural training, which seed varieties to use. These are all questions that I think that a lot of us are working on, but trying to do that on a scale of that 1 Acre Fund was doing was really quite challenging. So my initial entry point into sort of data systems really came from trying to solve some of these problems. So the way that they work is there's one field officer, and the field officer then is at the same time sort of ag extension, agro dealer, and then microfinance officer. So they have one field officer that provides then a bundle of the products that we had mentioned before, to approximately 100 to 200 farmers, and they then are reaching about 1,000 people. So this is sort of the internal structure that they've built to deliver these things at scale. And I led the agricultural research component for the organization. So then really trying to understand what goes into their product packages and what would be most viable. So they had when I got there, they had two principal mechanisms for collecting agricultural data in order to do research. One of them included field trials, both on-station research trials, but also farmer field trials, sort of A/B trials. And they also collected data via their M&E program. So they did maybe 10, 20,000 crop cuts per geospatially referenced crop cuts per year all across their programs. So then I had these two pieces of data, and my job principally was trying to link them together. So how can we derive insights from sort of the landscape scale information, and how we can pull that into validation trials at the research station and also on farm trials, and how can we do this again across really very diverse landscapes and lots of different types of farmers and agro-ecosystems. So a bit of luck when I was first starting this program. I met a couple of people that were quite influential for me in understanding really why data systems and data science would be so important to try to solve some of these agronomic questions. So Robert Owen on the left, I ran into him. He was teaching, I think, a small class on programming in a village in Western Kenya. And previously, he had worked for Google Research for about 10 years and was publishing papers in science on the side using, for instance, metadata from cellular phone to predict poverty in Rwanda. And so we started talking about really what was viable and interesting coming through sort of the data systems and data science work from Google, and how we can apply that then to smallholder farmers. And the second group of people that I met was William Wu, who's on the right picture on the right, and his wife Jehao Chien. So William worked previously for NASA, for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and was in charge of telecommunications between the Mars rovers and NASA. And his wife was a statistician from Stanford, and both of them moved to Tanzania to really establish data systems work for AFSIS, which was the African Soil Information Service. If you are familiar with it, it was like a 10-year project that worked in Africa to really map the soils in Africa, and they were in charge of sort of the data systems. And so we all kind of converged together, and I was talking with them about the problems that we had at Acre Fund with agronomy and with seed varieties and fertilizers, and they were sort of talking with me about really what's possible using large amounts of data, using modern analytics. And so they introduced me to a variety of newer influences. Ada Lovelace, sort of the founder of computer science back in the 1800s. Vannevar Bush, the father of modern computational sciences and computers. Also the founder of the National Science Foundation and the chief of the Manhattan Project. This is Claude Shannon, so a very influential communication theorist from Bell Labs. And then Aaron Schwartz, a pretty phenomenal hacker from the early 2000s. And then above all, they introduced me to Leo Breiman. If you know Leo Breiman, he was one of the inventors of machine learning, was famous for random forests and bagging. And he had a very interesting paper called Statistical Modeling in Two Cultures. And they were really my friends, William and JC and Robert, introduced me to this paper and introduced me to really what the power of machine learning could do if we had the right data sets in place. And basically, if you're familiar with Leo Breiman, you can forgive me if you're not. This is kind of briefly what he says. And he says that nature is sort of a black box, and there's inputs, whether it's water, whether it's sun, whether it's soils or seeds, and then there's outputs, which are plants and ecology and environment. And Leo Breiman was saying that historically, what we try to do is we try to create a data model that then emulates this black box, where we put data inputs and we get sort of predictions as the outputs. And he said that some things are just way too complicated for us to try to break down into data models. And in this case, what we're really interested in is maybe not necessarily knowing the data model, but we're really interested in the predictive accuracy. So maybe we should be shifting our paradigm from really understanding mechanisms to understanding predictions. And so then he said, in this case, other algorithms may be more appropriate, so decision trees and neural networks. And this paper certainly is very controversial in certain aspects. And I would really highly recommend, if you're interested in reading it, it's really quite interesting. Next, my friends again brought me into sort of introduction to the philosophy of why they were in Africa. Why weren't they in Silicon Valley or New York, making a lot more money? And what they were saying, particularly William was saying, is that he got tired of what he was supposed to be doing as a computer scientist. And Robert was saying what he was doing as a data scientist was just not attractive to him anymore. Where there's huge pools of money and attracting really large pools of talent to solve really trivial problems. So for instance, automating advertisements on Google or Facebook for shoes. Some of these algorithms that do this are really quite important, but the problems they're solving for are really quite trivial. And they both said that on the other side, there's only a very small pool of money and relatively smaller talent resources that are trying to solve very important problems. And so their important problems, they said, were like life and death, like life with agriculture and food, and then death being health and nutrition. So they wanted to then reverse this by using their talents then to move into these types of areas. And so this was a really nice combination between, I think, agricultural science and data science and computer science. And so we had a very nice collaboration initially in Kenya. So one of the first problems that we tried to solve for is, hey, what are some of the issues that you at One Acre Fund, talking about me, we're trying to deal with? And I was saying, well, we know there's a lot of spatial heterogeneity and yield response to sort of management practices and really very well managed agricultural practices with improved seeds, hybrids, and also fertilizer and management. But we don't really know what the spatial heterogeneity, what the drivers of it are. And so he said, well, what are some of your hypotheses? And I said, well, if you go to the field, we often see a lot of visual symptomologies. So we see, pests, disease, nutrient deficiencies. And I went to the field with them and I was pointing them out, phosphorus deficiencies or some calcium deficiencies or rust or maize-looth and necrosis disease. And they asked me, well, how can you know what is what? And I said, well, there's visual symptoms. Trained, you can pick it up. And so they said, well, maybe this is an interesting problem that we can assign to computer vision. And I said, well, sure, we can give that a shot. So the proposal that they had was, historically, people like all of us in this meeting have a lot of expertise. We've gone through years and years or decades of university. We've had lots of experience post-university in the field, and we've gained a lot of specialized knowledge. But it's concentrated in a very few and very limited number of people with the science. And then we need to get this expert knowledge to many, many different types of people, representing the farmers again on the right. And at the time, this paradigm was really challenging, because how can you take an expert and provide knowledge to so many people scattered across really large geographies? It's really cost prohibitive, to increase the numbers of trained experts, or increase their ability to reach other people via traveling from place to place. So this is where they brought in kind of sort of some of the tech mantra of crowdsourcing. So maybe there's a way to democratize this process. And provide bidirectional communication between the end users and the experts. And so their proposal was, hey, maybe we can put your expert knowledge into some sort of mobile technology, and then democratized access to everybody for some of these specialized information and knowledge domain experts. So our initial proposal goes something like this. So in the field, we take a photo from the field, and the photo from the field is something that's abnormal. So in this case, it's striped, interveinal chlorosis of maize leaves. But then there's a lot of maize leaf issues that look relatively similar to maybe an untrained or unexpert eye. We have fungal disease, we have zinc deficiencies, we have manganese deficiencies, and plant virus. So how can we identify which is which? Well, if we can aggregate a large number of photos and funnel them through sort of these knowledge or domain experts, then we can sort of create a training data set where we link data from the field to sort of known samples. And if we do this thousands of times, given the state of technology at the time and also currently, we're able to do computer vision to automate the diagnostics of this types of visual symptomology. So then we have automated diagnostics, and we can have rapid sort of information flows, from the field and then also back to the field. So we worked on the back end. They worked on the back end system. This is William Moon and Jehao Chen at their company called QED. They worked on the back end system to create a platform whereby the field officers at Acre Fund could take photos from the field and could upload photos in real time. We had an office, a rural field office that was connected to the internet, where we had a bunch of maybe 4 or 5 people from Kenya that were trained in sort of pathology and agronomy. And then they had a diagnostic tree, which you see on the right, where they go through and they say, okay, is it the leaves? Is it the shoots? Is it the roots? Is it colors? And so they can go through and they can diagnose and triage really what's happening in real time in order to kind of create the training data set and create the structure we needed to automate the diagnostics. And then, of course, we had sort of backups here. So every maybe 10 samples, we'd put it like a replica sample or a duplicate sample of known diagnostics, so we can kind of train or I guess calibrate the accuracy of any one individual person who's doing the diagnostics, so we can understand really what the quality of data that were coming out of the system was. So then we executed this, and in a very short time, we started getting thousands and thousands of images, all referenced from Western Kenya. And it happened to be also at the time we were dealing with MLND, so maize leaf necrosis disease, and the introduction of fall armyworm. So we started getting lots and lots of pictures of both, and we're able to create a pretty good database of diagnosed images, for which we can then put into our programs, into our analytics, and really start to understand what's really driving some of the yield variability between the different locations within the program. Concurrently, this is sort of separate to the work that I was doing, but it was linked somehow because my next door neighbor and friend in Kenya happened to be the director of the CDC in the region. Connecting him with William, and they had an interesting problem at the CDC. Big program, just over a 20-year period, particularly in Africa, and they were collecting data on what was causing child mortality from coming from clinics. So they would, a child would die, and they would run diagnostics, and they would write all this data down on forms, and the forms would be submitted through mail on paper. And then my friend at the CDC was saying, hey, this process is taking really a long time, and it's very challenging in order to get data in, and our data retrieval and return is very low. And is there a way that we can sort of use data systems to augment or to revamp sort of this process? So then William, again from QED, came in, and what they did was created for the CDC sort of a Scantron type form. So took their existing form and just made it a little more updated. So on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see sort of the red boxed form. So they standardized the format, and the same exact paper form they had before, but now it's standardized with this new format. And then they created a smartphone app to automatically detect when the image was above the form. Then they did a bunch of image processing in order to correct for the sort of the distortion of the 3 dimensions of the paper, and were able to run this through an optical character recognition platform so that people in the field would fill in the form. They would take a picture of it with their camera. It would be automatically updated into an Excel file, and every day it could be downloaded by the clinicians and scientists working for the CBC. And in the background, again, there were some checks and balances just to make sure that the optical character recognition was working relatively well. But in the end of the process, they had this automated system where they can track in real time the progress of the different laboratory outputs coming from all of the unique labs across the program. So the way it would work is on the top x-axis, you see the different procedures, the different lab procedures, and on the sort of the y-axis, you see the different labs coming through. And so as the different forms were submitted, they would get notifications or check boxes that the certain the particular laboratory tests were finished. And if everything was finished, then you get this green check at the very end. If they were missing, if particular labs were missing certain techniques or certain experiments coming through, they would get a notification automatically that they were missing data, and then they would call to understand what the problem was. So they can really improve sort of the rapidity and also the quality of data coming through the system. Okay, so that was the work that I did in Kenya, and right about that time, I got recruited by CIMMYT to lead an agronomy program for them in Nepal. So then I continued my journey eastward from Kenya to Nepal, carrying with me the connections I had with sort of data systems and data science, and trying to see how we could apply this on research-based agronomy rather than sort of development-based agronomy. So we had this project area. This was a USAID-funded project looking at seeds and fertilizer systems. So this was also my first opportunity to really interact with maize breeders and the breeding program. And we had a fairly large area in Nepal from north to south, east to west. And if any of you know Nepal, the geographies are very diverse. Within a very short period of time, you have elevations that go from maybe 200 meters to 4,000 or 5,000 meters, and these valleys in between that could be tropical rice and maize-based systems, or temperate wheat-based systems with cool vegetables. So really a large diversity of regions. So one of the first things that we did is, borrowing from what we learned from the AFSIS project, we collaborated with the government of Nepal to aggregate their soil data and run their soil data through machine learning algorithms that were then calibrating with remote sensing in order to create a really high quality and high resolution digital soil map for the regions. I'll zoom in a little bit more on this so you can really see the details that can be provided by this soil later. And the idea is that we can then apply sort of this geospatial machine learning techniques in order to derive hypotheses for us. So in this case, we can say, okay, some soils are maybe acidic, other ones are alkaline, and we can then look at the varieties and the agronomy program that kind of integrates between the two to really think about strategically what we should be doing from a research perspective to target what was driving, the yield responses for particular regions. We also created a nice web-based portal. Maybe Kate can send you links for this later, where users can interact with it. So the government, but also farmers and seed companies and fertilizer companies are able to interact and really retrieve nice quality soil data from particular points that they're interested in. Then once we had our hypothesis about what we wanted to test where, we worked again with William Wu from QED to totally digitize all of the research data flow process. So from identifying the regions that we're working with, so on the figure on the top left sort of shows the process flow for the digitization. So working with our target area to define our regions using machine learning, taking samples and having the samples being tagged with QR codes so we can track them in real time where they're coming from. We had some navigation software for our field teams in order to really use the limited number of field teams that we had in the most accurate way possible. And then our field teams, when we're working on research stations or within farmers' fields themselves, all the data was digitized through ODK, which is Open Data Kit. So anytime we had data that was being collected, either socioeconomic data or yield data or environmental data, as the data was collected in real time, graph on the bottom right, we could see in real time data as it comes in, where it's coming in from, and we can look at the quality. So we're able to then put checks and balances into our field team in order to really improve the quality and also the speed that the data was collecting, more real-time responses to what's going on in the field. So then we took the data that was coming from the field, and then we decided to run this through some of Leo Breiman's machine learning. So then we put it through random forests. The graph on the left basically tells us the importance of particular variables in driving our yield, so productivity. And we were looking at then, of course, the first two variables are GPS, so latitude and longitude, so there's a really important spatial variability. The next one was stress, and this is kind of biotic stress, so it's a kind of a generic term for pests and diseases. And then we start moving into sort of the abiotic stresses, the nitrogen and phosphorus. And so we're able to then take all the data that we have, run it through machine learning, and it'd be able to kind of help us to understand what are the really important variables with which then we can formulate a hypothesis and programs to be able to determine what particular products should go in which location and where we should be focusing our research efforts on. One of the other interesting things we can do with machine is a particular variable. So we nitrogen, the relation between nitrogen and yield, and we're able to predict with machine learning around 100 kilos per hectare was giving us more or less economic optimum yield return of about 4 tons per hectare. And then when we validated this with field trials, we found more or less the same thing. So this really was a nice validation for us that integrating some machine learning techniques into our more classical mechanistic-based field trials, it's really a nice use of two types of statistics and kind of merging the different branches of statistics into one sort of program that looks at sort of spatial agronomy and spatial agricultural programs. So in parallel, in Nepal, we were developing ag extension materials. These were face-to-face, sort of traditional ag extension materials that were very high quality, ended up being endorsed by the government, and we're delivering really good results. But one of the problems that we had is that at scale, to be able to scale this type of program is really expensive. We calculated that around $100 per person per visit was required in order to develop and execute this type of ag extension program. So that puts a lot of burden of financial resources and strain, not only on our project, but also on the government of Nepal. So we were looking at ways that we can kind of go around that. And one of the ways that we thought about was working on digital ag extension. So another kind of bit of luck from my time in Nepal is I ran into a group called PlantX. And PlantX is a German agri-tech startup that started also working with automated computer vision detection of pests and diseases and nutrient deficiencies in plants. They were working in India, and within a short period of time, they went from, I think, 0 users to 2.5 million users across South Asia. So we collaborated with them on calibrating their tool to Nepal, but we also got some money from USAID to develop a digital ag extension tool. So then they came out to Nepal, and we had some of our staff work with farmers to kind of identify, how they use their phones and what they would like to use their phones for, where they get information from, how they'd like the information to be presented. And we developed a nice ag extension tool that is now scaled to all of the PlantX users worldwide, which is, again, like 2.5 million people. And this is how the visualization worked, where they would farmers would enter in their variety, well, first of all, their plant species, then the variety that they're using, and then either their planting date or they get a planting date recommendation based on their geolocation. And then this wheel would sort of churn as the days would move. And so this was integrated and linked to sort of crop growth models and some of the outputs from the research that we had in Nepal. And as sort of the days to maturity would advance, they would get push notifications for fertilization or for weeding or for monitoring pests and diseases. So we were not only able to provide farmers information, but also get information back from farmers about what they were planting, when they were planting, how they're managing, and at the end we would get sort of a farmer estimated yield responses back. So we can sort of have a more bidirectional communication tool that can be in real time for farmers. We also weren't just interested in smartphones, because I know that while smartphones they're growing, their penetration of smartphones in places like Nepal or India or in Africa are growing rapidly. There's still a large proportion of people that don't have access to smartphones. So we partnered with Viamo, which is a group that works with I guess non-smartphones, whatever you might call them, regular phones or dumb phones or whatever. And they work with SMS and IVR. IVR is integrated voice response. So that's sort of, you call in and you get prompts and you push a button and you get messages. And their argument was that many places farmers are not quite literate, so that we get around the literacy. So we worked with Viamo and we translated all of our materials into SMS and IVR. And for $2,000, we were able to reach 12 million users across Nepal by collaborating with the Nepal Telecom Corporation. So that was a very nice, easy way to kind of scale some of our, and cheaply to scale some of our access to agricultural extension materials. But we wanted to know empirically, which methodology would actually be better for driving change, so for driving adoption or behavior change or knowledge acquisition from farmers. So then we collaborated with some economists at McGill University, and we did an RCT that compared all the different types of ag extensions. So we had smartphone app, we had the IVR SMS-based system, we had radio, and we also had our face-to-face extension program. And recently we got the outputs back from the study, and the statistics were telling us that the app was by far the most effective method for both improving agricultural literacy and also behavior change. So I wasn't expecting that it would actually outperform the face-to-face extension, but it did. So this was giving us a lot of hope that there's potential for delivering really good ag extension material through digital agriculture. And that's nice because it links all sort of the other data systems and digital data work that we've been doing together. We found that female farmers didn't benefit as much as male farmers. That's some interesting thing there, because a lot of people would say that maybe this would be a way to bridge the gender divide, but we didn't find that. I think there's some more research that we need to probe exactly why. But we also didn't find that the app excluded sort of the lower income distribution. So it was able to really bypass sort of the access that higher income distribution farmers have towards agricultural extension materials. So that was really nice. And I think that us as a community, we should be thinking about the future of agriculture may be digital, and we should think about how our programs, whether it's on the breeding side or on the soil side, should be or could be integrated into sort of digital mechanisms for developing agriculture. The next thing that we came to is, okay, so we had understanding of the landscape. We had understood sort of what sort of products and programs, what varieties needed to be developed, what fertilizers needed to go where. We knew the how, okay, so our delivery mechanisms were sort of well placed. But now we needed to know sort of the how of the execution. So how should we execute this program to reach the most number of farmers and really achieve some of our targets from the project? So we came up with a criteria. We wanted to find areas where we had high farmer population densities, we had high yield gaps, we had good responses to better agronomic practices, and we had access to markets. So the question we had is, okay, then how do we get this information from a really challenging landscape? our first tool was surveys, doing household surveys, but this was really expensive. Just our initial household survey for 600 households cost us $30,000. So this was really not sufficient, not scalable for us. So then we thought, again, how could we get this information cheaper? And this is where, again, I reached out to my friend William to understand what some of the options were. So this is what we came up with. If you look at a landscape view of, from a satellite of the landscape, if you look at a satellite view of the landscape, probably one of us could outline where the agricultural fields are, where the forests are, where the roads are, where the rivers are, where the houses are. So maybe there's a way that we can then use computer image recognition and machine learning to be able to help us characterize this landscape. And so the theory is basically, if a human eye can identify things, we should be able to train a computer to do the same thing if we have the right type of data. So then William took a bunch of different layers. This is Sentinel-2 RGB images of the area we were working in Nepal. Combined that with NDVI layers over the same region. And then MODIS, which MODIS is a satellite product, land surface temperature layers, and combine that with segmented unsupervised learning landscapes. So we took an unsupervised algorithm and it just cut the landscape into little chunks, so these little sort of puzzle pieces. And then those puzzle pieces we turned into training data sets. So each one of those puzzle pieces, we took a subsample of the puzzle pieces across Nepal, and then we put them onto this sort of a crowdsourcing dashboard that was online, and then users then outlined the areas which were agricultural regions, which are in orange here, houses, which are in pink, and then the natural areas, which are sort of the other pieces. We did this maybe 50,000 times. And then we're able to train a neural network to be able to do automatic detection of it. So this is the original image that we saw. This is when we added the house layers, and the computer was automating the location of all the houses. I'll go back and forth again so you can see it. So no automation, with automation. So you can see that it's not perfect, but more or less it gets us enough ahead to where we want to be. And then the next one, then we include both the roads outlined in green and the agricultural areas outlined in orange. So I'll do that again. Here's without the roads and the agricultural lands. Here's with. So again, it's not exactly perfect, but also the landscape is challenging. And then we did it across the country, and we're able to produce a map for the whole regions that we're working with in Nepal. The red dots represent the access points for agri-dealerships. So we're able to put a network of the population densities from the houses, the farmer population densities from integrating between house density and farmland density. We're able then to look at the road network and connect that to the agro-dealer network to say exactly where the spots that we wanted to focus on would be. For some of the more sort of data inclined folks, this is sort of a output of the accuracy. So we got a relative accuracy of 0.913, true positive weight of 0.71, false negative rate of 0.28, positives of 0.15, and an overall precision of 0.82. So, while this is not, totally perfect, it certainly serves our needs. And we were able to do the entire country for, I think, $50,000. And we got millions and millions of data points. So it ended up being a very cost-effective way for us to scale some of these landscape issues that we have. So sort of in conclusion, my next move was eastward again from Nepal to CIMMYT in headquarters in Mexico. Let me think what I have next. Okay, so now in Mexico, while I still retain my title of systems agronomist and soil scientist, I'm doing almost exclusively data systems and data science work. I'm able now to formulate collaborations with more diverse people, such as Kate here, and Tom Payne and Rosemary and other people at CIMMYT who are in disciplines even further than I was exposed to at Acre Fund or CIMMYT in Nepal. And I'm really enjoying hearing from the breeding people, You all have a really fantastic work that you're doing, a really important problem that you're trying to solve globally, and I'm really looking forward to collaborating with all of you in some point in the future, in whatever capacity possible. In closing, the CEO, founder of Acre Fund, Andrew Yoon, when I was first approaching him to tell him about the work I wanted to do with data systems and machine learning, he said, that's great. He said, I really encourage you to do that. I think it should be the way that we need to go forward. But I want to caution you, he says, all of this work that we do, it could be neat, it could be novel, but if we don't focus on the outputs, and the outputs are improving the lives and livelihoods of farming communities around the world, if we don't focus on this, then it's no use even trying. So really focus on whatever you do, whatever I do now, on sort of outputs for real people. So thanks for listening. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be able to speak with you all, and I would love to learn more about what you're doing, and maybe if there's a way that we can collaborate together. So thanks.
And I'd like to thank our speaker very much, and we'd like to open the discussion for questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question to our speaker.
Kate, you have a question in the chat.
Okay. Thank you. Are you able to see that? Thank you, Liz.
I'll get there. Okay. This is from the CEO of okay, so let me read the question now. So thank you very informative presentation. I'm Rasarin. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce this right. The CEO of Listen Field. I have questions as follows. One, the geospatial machine learning for analyzing soil profile is very interesting. Can we access the algorithm? We'd like to provide this to Thai farmers. The second question, we would provide the mobile farmer AI for farmers in Thailand in order to help farmers to record the activity and provide e-agronomists. Is there any way to collaborate in building growth analysis and risk analysis regarding climate? Okay, so for the first question, yes. I have all of the algorithms that we used in the data sets posted onto GitHub. So maybe I can provide my GitHub link to Kate afterwards, and she can hand it over to you. Our scripts are initially written in R, so if you know R, great. But they could also be transposed into Python or other programs too. I'd be happy to share all that for you. For the second question, yeah, I'm sure. So I'm not a climatologist, but I do know we have an excellent climatologist on staff here, and who is doing this work, and we're working with him on doing this exact sort of thing. So taking climate uncertainty around planting timings and fertilizer timings, and running that into sort of our overall ag extension program, which we've been putting up into digital ag extension tools. So we're working on the same problem, and be happy to chat with you about this. And also I can link you with Carlo, our climatologist, to help you work on it. But it sounds like a really interesting program. Thailand's a beautiful country, and it seems like there are good applications there too.
Do we have
This is Liz. I work with the Gobi project. We manage genomics data for breeding, to breed better varieties. And I was really interested in your comment that you could pair varieties with a particular soil type. You had different levels of nitrogen and boron, I think, listed there. Were you able to do that, to actually pair varieties with distinctive soil types? Because that seems like a very complex question.
Yeah, it is a very complex question. We were trying to do that, and we were doing that with one of our colleagues. I don't know if you know him, Abdurrahman Al-Bashir. So he's a maize breeder based out of Nepal, and he's been working a lot with the biofortified zinc varieties of maize. And so we were putting sort of the maize varieties with the zinc that had the biofortification of zinc in areas where you had higher levels of zinc, you know, because they need more zinc from the soil in order to get more zinc into the plant.
Mhm.
We're also working with them in areas where there's lower zinc in order to provide more zinc, lower zinc in the soil to provide more zinc to these plants through zinc-enriched fertilizers in some soils. In other soils, in the region that were very alkaline, so the alkalinity then impairs the biochemical availability of zinc. So we're pairing his zinc fortified varieties of maize with acidulating fertilizers in order to alleviate sort of the unavailability conditions within the soil. So that's, and we're getting, I think, our first seasons of response back, and that was really, I think, quite a nice combination of plants and soils and fertilizers. Now, our limitation has been in the past, we had good soil data, but we didn't have combination of good soil data, good yield response data, and good genomic data. And now, Kate and I, and also Tom Payne and Rosemary are talking about sort of their global field trials they're doing of their seeds.
The international wheat improvement networks are the nurseries that are sent out globally.
Yeah, and if there's a way that we can then look at sort of our global soil mapping that we could do, and we have the management data coming through, and we also have then the genomic data, and if there's a way that we can put these data together and do this really on a global scale, I mean, the data assets that you all have and that this network has, I haven't seen this anywhere else, and I'm really excited to be working with that on the question that you outlined.
Yeah, it'd be very exciting to do another layer of machine learning to find the best fit of the variety for the soil type.
For sure. And so where, if you can give me a little insights onto where you're working and what are you working with?
So we're a Bill and Melinda Gates funded project to manage genomics data, and Kate's our PI at CIMMYT, so she knows about the project and can fill you in. And we're actually located at Cornell. So if you want to come back and visit, we'd be very, very glad to talk to you.
Sure.
And our main goal is to implement genomic selection using that genomics data. So I think this could be a very interesting project.
Cool. Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to join, Liz. Do we have any other questions from anyone else on the call or on the seminar? Okay, well, not hearing any other questions, I would just like to thank David very much again for his excellent presentation, and I would like to thank all of you for joining. We will be publishing the webinar, and also I can gather any links that he alluded to during his presentation and also provide those. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a good day or good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.